And welcome, students, to our next unit. We're going to be getting into talking about the internet. So before we can fully talk about the different aspects of the internet, let's just give you a real quick, although this may not be quick, history of the internet. There's a lot to talk about. We're going to try to kind of go through it pretty quickly. This is, again, a kind of a brief overstroke. There's a lot more in-depth detail we could go into, but I digress. Let's go. So getting started. The internet, as we know, it was only a vague idea 60 plus years ago, think like 1950s around there. It was very fundamental compared to what we know and experience today. There was no web browser, there was, no GUI interface, you didn't have pictures and stuff like that. Now, computers at the time could only handle a single task at a time, which was known as batch processing. Now, batch processing, if you have any understanding of it, is not a good thing. Very much it would take everything, literally it's called a batch, it would load it all in and go at once. Now, because of how this was designed, programming during these days was very difficult. Remember, this is back the punch card era kind of thing. So it was not a fun time to be in computer science necessarily, because often there would be bugs, there would be frayed nerves, and a lot of wasted time. Because hey, look, I go run this program and it didn't work. There was no fixing it on the fly. It was you had to make it all up, then you had to take it down and all this other stuff. So it was not an easy thing to do. Now, eventually, a concept was birthed known as time sharing that would allow multiple users to access the same computer. And time sharing was actually a very big fundamental thing that would actually come along later again. Also, when we start talking about the cloud, time sharing was one of those fundamental concepts that would help that be made. All right, let's talk about one of the primary precursors to the internet. There were several projects ongoing at the same time that would lay the groundwork for the modern internet. After the launch of Sputnik, DARPA, or the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, would develop the predecessor to the modern internet with a project known as ARPANET. Additionally, the military network by the RAND Corporation, the commercial network by the National Physical Laboratory in England, and the scientific networks at Claudius in France all helped to lay the foundation for our modern internet. Now, let's get into information delivery because it's important to understand how communication occurred in those early days. Because obviously it's not like today where you can have wireless communication, you have all this other stuff that went on. Universities were one of the driving forces in that they helped develop the interface messaging processor, or the IMP, to act as a front to the mainframe. Ooh, bump keyboard here. To communicate to networks. Universities, therefore, were cautious about the sharing computers, so this allowed users to access resources without touching the computer itself. Pretty much, they didn't want someone coming in messing with the mainframe, changing a bunch of stuff, because the mainframe typically stored like your programs, your applications, stuff like that. And then what the IMP would do is allow you to have access stuff remotely. And mostly what the IMPs did is that they were the devices that were connected to the network, and a lot of times these IMPs were connected to other IMPs in groups that were known as IMP subnets. And so that's how they would communicate then, is through these IMPs. Now, all this communication stuff would eventually be standardized slightly with the development of the transmission control protocol, which pretty much would allow for the verification of information. So if you sent something from one IMP to another, the TCP would verify that the information was non-corrupted and stuff like that. All right, information delivery. Developed in England, packet switching was designed to break file sizes up into smaller chunks and have them be reassembled at the finishing node. Now, the reason for this was that congestion could occur. Pretty much you have a large file, you try to send it down this line, that's the only thing that can get down at that time. And if you have a lot of other stuff trying to go at the same time, it's going to cause issues. So they would break these files up because of the high traffic. So what they were broken up into was known as packets. Packets pretty much to take a file, break it up into small chunks, send each chunk at a time. That were then sent down, and then when they arrived at their destination, they would use the file headers to pretty much reassemble them and verify that these files were intact. All right, let's get a little bit into talk about the fear of communication loss. Now, when mid and long-range missiles were discovered in Cuba in 1962, it's kind of stoked the fear of an atomic conflict, because all of a sudden, oh no, the Soviets are going to get us. Well, how this relates to our talk about the internet is that information systems up to this point use a centralized architecture, meaning that if you wanted to take out the central computer, pretty much all communication to any devices connected to it would be lost. Right? It was a centralized architecture, so it wasn't exactly a good idea to have around in the event of a nuclear attack. So therefore, decentralized networks, or you might hear the term distributed networks, were developed so that in the event of loss of a node, communication could still occur with other nodes, and a node is simply just a device that's on the network. Now, speaking of devices, let's talk about standardization. One of the first protocols developed was the X25, which is developed to allow communication through phone companies' networks in exchange for a monetary fee. Pretty much you pay them money, they let you use their networks to send information down them. Now, DARPA, if you remember, was using the TCP protocol, and communication was done via gateways in order to transmit information. Now, the ISO, Internet Standardization Organization, designed what was known as the OSI reference model. OSI reference model has different layers of the internet, but the whole idea behind it is that they're going to attempt to standardize the network from its ends. In other words, rather than trying to have to redesign all like the hardware and everything like that, we're going to go node by node and use those kind of pieces of communication in order to communicate. Now, eventually, the whole OSI model here was simulated by the TCP, and that would give birth to the modern TCP/IP protocol that's used today. TCP/IP, of course, is Transmission Control Protocol, and IP is Internet Protocol. So that's how these things all communicate with this modern Internet. Let's go ahead and jump into now the end of an era, all right? Because now we talk about a lot of the stuff that brought the Internet kind of up to be. Because in February of 1990, the ARPANET hardware that had been used for the last 50 years was finally removed. But even though they pulled out ARPANET, the Internet itself was still up and running. Because at this point, it had spread out. You know, all their networks that were in place at universities, all these other things that now had their own hardware. Of course, naturally, this would not be the end of the changes to come to the Internet. Now, Tim Berners-Lee would develop the HTML standards in the World Wide Web in about 1990. He kind of came out with the stuff. He published it. And his work would inspire others to drive and develop many of the functions that we use today. So let's go ahead and jump into one of those very first important things is that, of course, a browser development, because we pretty much all use a browser nowadays. Whether it's on your phone or on your computer, we're using a browser. Now, the original web in its truest form was highly unorganized. Like, it was impossible to find anything. You had to know exactly what you're looking for, where you're looking for it. And in its original form, it really only consists of lines and lines of text. I mean, unless you were a super nerd, it's not really something to kind of get excited about. Now, a venture group led by Mark Andreessen would develop Mosaic, which was the first graphical web browser. And when I say first graphical, that means that, you have like pictures, you have video, stuff like that. Remember, because I said prior to this, it was all text. All right, so there were browsers out there, but they weren't really what you would think of in a modern web page. Now, Mosaic would eventually be noticed by Jim Clark, who was a pretty wealthy investor. He's out of like Sun Microsystems and stuff like that, and he was looking for like the next big thing. Well, he would go on to fund Andreessen and a couple other grad students in order to develop Netscape Navigator. Of course, you don't make another big software title without catching the attention of other software developers. And that would lead to the browser war. If you haven't guessed already, Microsoft is that other software developer. They wanted to treat the internet pretty much as a toll road. All right, and they wanted to call it the Microsoft Network. The reason why they wanted this is they wanted to pretty much control the flow of information. They wanted to be everything going through them. And their success, the rapid rise to the top, it created a week of software corpses, as they rose to the top. Companies like Novell, IBM, all these companies had kind of been through the ringer with Microsoft because Microsoft was just so efficient and brutal in how they had handled things. Now, when Netscape came out and it got out, it was selling very, very quickly. And that runaway success kind of forced Microsoft to do a 180. They changed their tactics completely. Bill Gates came out and announced that pretty much the web, which they had kind of been ignoring up to that point, like, yeah, it was there, but they were kind of like, kind of like not on top of it as much as they probably should have. He pretty much came and said that the web now is the most important thing since the birth of the PC. All right, so he's like, everybody, hands on deck, we need to figure out how to solve this problem. So one of their first things that they actually do is approach Netscape, offer them, because a lot of the time what Microsoft do, they would buy the company out from underneath you, merge it in their technology, whatever. Netscape said, no, we're not interested. So they turned down multiple offers with Microsoft, either to do business with them or to be bought outright. They're like, no, we're not interested in that sort of thing. There's a lot of back and forth too in like, journals and papers and stuff like that between the two companies, talking about themselves. One of the famous quotes is Netscape talked about Microsoft product being an outdated set of device drivers, which to Microsoft software developers was a big insult. So eventually, though, Microsoft and Netscape, they came to a final meeting. They're going to discuss how they can incorporate their technologies. Well, it didn't really kind of go so well, and both sides have different accounts of how the events went on. But Netscape would contact Gary Reback, who's a lawyer, very famous for taking on antitrust cases with Microsoft. And he very quickly realized Netscape had underestimated Microsoft's growth because Netscape's was a relatively young company, and they assumed, well, Microsoft is going to obey the law because that's what the law is for. Well, Microsoft decided we're going to take you head on. And how they did this is they launched their own browser, Internet Explorer. And now, unlike a Netscape, which had a charge for its browser, so you had to pay to buy Netscape in order to install it, Microsoft had one distinct advantage, and that was being able to sell its browser for free. Right? And the reason why I could do this is because Microsoft got billions in the bank. They don't have to make money on this. So they're like, hey, we'll just bundle it with our Windows operating system, free. And you don't have to pay anything to buy it. It's free software. Now, what this turned into was a war attrition. Pretty much, I would do something, you would do something. They're both kind of losing. Microsoft's losing money because they don't sell Internet Explorer, but they're selling this operating system, so they kind of make some money. But Netscape, anytime Microsoft eats at their products, they're losing market share. Lose market share means you lose profits. So Microsoft would pretty much match every new feature that Netscape came out with, and steadily eroded away the market share that Netscape had. Netscape started off with a big market share. Internet Explorer came out, and it gradually kind of ate away at that. Additionally, Microsoft, and this is where they really get kind of the shady, they would use their salesmen in order to force hardware manufacturers, such as like HP or Compaq, to keep them from using Netscape Navigator machines. So rather than saying, hey, we're going to manufacture this and we're going to have Netscape Navigator bundled with our hardware. Well, Microsoft says, well, if you do that, we're going to pull the license out from the Windows software, which as a hardware manufacturer was a big deal because, well, if I can't sell the operating system, how can I sell the software? I'm not going to be in business. So the hardware manufacturer said, well, I guess we won't bundle Navigator, we'll just keep Internet Explorer. All right, so they pretty much had to comply or else they'd be out of business. Now, naturally, of course, if you haven't noticed, this is very shady, kind of illegal stuff that's going on, and to come back to haunt Microsoft as they would be dragged into antitrust proceedings. We mentioned this when we had talked about the evolution of the computer. This is ultimately one of those big things that dragged Microsoft up in front of all that, was this particular thing here. Now, the outcome. Microsoft, if you recall, was found guilty in order to be broken up. However, the appeal allowed the company to remain as one entity. Netscape, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky, and they kind of ended official software support for Navigator in 1997. However, the successor to Navigator, Netscape Communicator, was purchased by AOL. AOL, though, wasn't quite as cool or tech-savvy or innovative, and so even though Communicator was out, it didn't really do that much. This, of course, would play into other things. Once Internet Explorer had the market share, they, in turn, weren't quite as innovative as well. All right, it wasn't until Firefox came out and started innovating that Microsoft would innovate Internet Explorer. Competition thrives innovation. Now, the source code for Communicator would live on and eventually become a browser known as Firefox, which I already mentioned, would then eventually become the next big competitor to that of Internet Explorer. All right, now we have to also talk about search if we're talking about the internet, because who doesn't search for something on the internet, whether it's, hours for a restaurant, or, it's how to get someplace, or, information about something for a paper. Browsers weren't the only things that were developed in the 1990s. Obviously, yes, a browser is important to be able to access the web, but if you can't look up something, what good is it? All right. And in those early days of the internet, being able to search and find things, it was terrible at best. More likely, it was next to impossible. It wasn't really until two students at Stanford University who wanted to really kind of keep up with their fantasy basketball that they start creating a directory of all web pages. And when I say directory, it's it's a list of where everything's at. Now they would eventually go on to form the company Yahoo, and Yahoo was barely successful right off the gate because hey, it's like I can find stuff. Great. Now Yahoo had one big disadvantage, and that was that while it could kind of help you search for things, the directory upon it was built was all done manually. Pretty much two guys would go through and they would just start plugging websites in where everything was. Not exactly the most efficient way of doing things, as it meant there's a lot of man hours that went into mapping of any web pages. Now this would change when another company known as Excite decided that they're going to use software to map and create its directories. Now that was the big difference. Excite was pure software. So they had the software go through and use algorithms and stuff to determine, hey, this is the web page, this is where it's mapped, da 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 da. So a lot of that stuff happened here because of Excite. Now this of course kind of set up a little bit of a new war between particularly Yahoo and Excite. There's other companies that came out too, but they'd be the first of many new search engines that would emerge. Now, obviously, in order to be sustainable, you got to be able to make money. So what they did is they would turn to advertising in order to generate revenue on the web because you got to pay the bill somehow. So their most simple solution: let's use banner ads. And if you ever encountered a banner ad, it is annoying. All right, and particularly if they're one of the ones that give audio or flash or anything like that. They weren't exactly the most friendly things ever. And because that process of search that had been so innovative in helping revolutionize the web, soon became lost to the flashy appeal of money. Right? It's like literally the banner ads took over web pages. Some pages were covered with banner ads. And it's like, where's the search? It wasn't clean. And it wouldn't be really until the next big search giant, Google, came along that search would change once more. All right, so let's talk about that Google emergence. Now, prior to Google emerging, search was not efficient. As I kind of alluded to, you could spend hours trying to find something that you were looking for. Like if you wanted to look for a new car and you wanted to look up maybe a car dealership near you, you could spend hours trying to find the relevant information. Today, it's like instant. Now, Google search engine was important, and what it did is that it used links in order to determine a site's importance. The more links back to a website, the chances were that that information was more relevant and it was more important. Right? This is also known as link counting. Right? Now, one of the things that Google was against was particularly banner ads. All right, and they were opposed to using them completely on their site. They're like, nope, no banner ads. They're kind of allergic to advertising. Eventually, they knew they had to do something, and so they did embrace advertising. And they did in true Silicon Valley fashion by stealing it from someone else. They stole the idea from that of Idea Labs in order how to solve that problem of advertising on the web. And Idea Labs' solution, really, if you think about it, was kind of simple. It was to treat advertising similar to like your yellow pages, where advertisements would be displayed along the results. If you ever opened up, have a yellow page book, I mean, they're kind of hard to find now because people don't really print yellow pages books now. But if you find one, you open up to the yellow pages. You look for, let's say, a plumber. You can look under, it'll give you a list of plumbers, and then typically there'll be ads for the different plumbing agencies, next to those results. And that's kind of what Idea Labs was here. It's like, hey, if you're looking for something, then there's a chance that you might be interested in buying that something. Because if you like, going back to the example I just gave, if you're looking for a plumber, there's a good chance you're looking for a plumber because you need a plumber. Right? So if you're doing a search online for a plumber, the chances are you're probably going to want to know information relevant to that plumber that's local to you, because you may want to, hey, I want to know what the hours are of the business in town. Boom, you can pull that right up. Now, the concept behind all this is known as keywords. This is a concept that's been around for a while. But what a keyword is permits. It's a search term that when you plug it in is going to be an important word that should be in your search results. All right, now let's go back to Google here. Now, Google, of course, would go on to make billions in search, billions and billions of ads. However, they did not stop with search because they knew if they stopped, pretty much somebody else was going to come along and overtake them. So they have to constantly be innovative. So they branched out into numerous other projects, such as Gmail, Google Drive, they have the Chrome web browser, much more. Obviously, now Chrome is one of the most popular browsers, but we'll talk about that later. Now, one interesting thing about Google is their model, don't be evil. I mean, because they don't want to repeat the mistakes of previous software corporations past, like Microsoft. Oh, we don't want to get dragged for antitrust stuff. However, there's numerous concerns with the amount of data that Google collects, particularly among privacy advocates. Whether it's things from just what you're typing in search engine, or if you have a smartphone, what are they collecting on that? If you're using any kind of like voice activation software, such as like Google Home, Alexa, whatever. What kind of information is being collected? Where is it being stored? How long is it stored for? All these things are kind of valid concerns. All right, next, let's jump into that of e-commerce, because who doesn't buy something online these days? Recall that there was a commercial side. Back when I talked about the other side, there was a commercial side of the network, which I believe was the one from the National Laboratory out of England. Shopping and buying online, though, really wouldn't take off until the emergence of Amazon and eBay. They really were the founders of the modern-day e-commerce. Now, if you didn't know, Amazon originally started off as an online bookstore. Think kind of like Barnes & Noble, but a lot simpler, a lot smaller. And their job was like, their whole mantra was like, hey, if a customer leaves a negative review, it's not on us. It's on you guys for selling us a bad product. eBay, on their hand, started off as an auction site, and they still kind of are, though you can buy directly. That sold what many might have perceived when it first opened as junk. But obviously, that didn't hold true because now Amazon and eBay are huge. All right, the explosive growth and the bubble bust are two things we're going to talk about that pretty much came out of Amazon and eBay's growth. Both Amazon and eBay use the business plan style known as get, big, fast. And pretty much the summary of what Get Big Fast means is that it's a plan that says your short-term profits should be sacrificed in exchange for really quick and rapid growth. All right. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean profits don't matter because you still got to pay the bills. But in the short term, you should expand as much as possible so you can get really big, get your foot out there, especially in the early internet when there wasn't really, much out there in terms of competition. So their whole idea is if you get out there and get this big name recognition, you could be the next big thing. Now, the runaway success of both companies has spawned numerous other online companies. There's a plethora of them out there. You can go and look up all the internet companies that used to exist. However, the thing that I should mention about a lot of these companies that came up during this time is that they're house of cards, which means they have very poor foundation. They made a lot of times very little to no profit. There's an example in a documentary I watched once where a guy said, there's a company that threw like this $1 million party for their employees, and they made maybe like $1,000 in profit. So obviously they're not, or it's not even a profit, just in sales. So they're just blowing this money on whatever that they get from investors. And during this time, investors, they knew a lot of the stuff was going on, but they did it anyways because they wanted to kind of cash in. Because what's the chance if you had invested in this one company, that company was the next Amazon, that company was the next eBay. That was the whole idea, is that you got to cash in on this bubble before it burst. Well, the bubble obviously eventually did burst in the early 2000s, particularly after a set of poor holiday sales. They're like, oh yeah, holiday season, things are going to be selling great. Well, it didn't quite sell as good as people were hoping. And because of that, a lot of Wall Street kind of turned their ire onto these companies, and, well, they quickly folded. And they kind of went poof, because all of a sudden everyone's like, hey, you spend my money, I'm going to come collect it. Now, Amazon and eBay, they still took a good hit from the crash, but they primarily survived because one of the big things that they had done was build up an emphasis on the customer. They had very much that, customer comes first, we're going to do everything we can to work with you, and that goodwill reputation kind of helped them survive. Now, there are some side effects of the crash, particularly some good ones. One of the big boons was the upgrade and development of the telecommunications network. If you're not familiar with that, pretty much prior to that, it's like back in those days, internet for most people, you get dial-up. It means you had your phone line, you plugged in, and it's like if your mom wanted to use the phone, you had to get off the internet, kind of thing. Obviously, not like that today. Hugely, vastly improved. And one of those things that helps with that was the very costly laying and development of huge swaths of fiber optic cabling being laid in the ground, which pretty much allowed for stronger and faster connections. Because Without fiber optic, you didn't have that stuff because fiber optic was wicked fast compared to what had been there. Additionally, in the 21st century, you see a shift in content development. With modern internet, it's far easier for the average user to create and develop content for a web. And this is known as Web 2.0. Right? It's referring to rather than web being developed by a few select individuals or corporations or education institutions, the average person is the one creating content, and we can see that today. There's numerous content creation apps out there, whether it's YouTube, Twitch, whatever. And another thing to note about with the average user being able to create things is the backbone that came with it. The effects of the crash helped put that backbone in there. We have faster land connections. We have better cellular connections than we used to. I mean, you got like 4G LTE at the time of this recording. It's like, hey, that's a great connection. You also have things such as improved wireless technology for wireless internet. There's a whole bunch of things that have come out that make the internet a lot better, and you can largely have the same for the effects of the crash, because the crash helped develop a lot of that stuff a lot faster than it otherwise may have happened. It might still happen, but it might have been another 10 to 15 years. Now, let's just really quickly talk about some modern innovations. All right, one of those, we can thank the company known as Napster. If you don't know what Napster is, that's fine. They don't really exist. I mean, they do, but they don't. All right, Napster would lead the charge of digital audio and streaming. They didn't really do too much for streaming, but you can thank them because of it, for streaming to kind of come into play via things such as peer-to-peer sharing of files, albeit illegally. Right? Because this is peer-to-peer sharing of like music and stuff like that was done illegally. Right? It wasn't necessarily very illegal because it's not like you just took your own song in the basement like, hey, I want to distribute it. That's great. But they were trying to take stuff that was copyrighted by other musicians and stuff like that, ripping the audio and then converting it to MP3 and sharing it. Now, as I already mentioned, the MP3 is the primary reason. Without the development of MP3, you wouldn't have compression of audio files. They'd probably be like in maybe a waveform, maybe you're lucky WMA, something like that, but they would be huge. An uncompressed file is huge compared to that of a compressed file. Now, today you can, of course, get 320 kilobits per second MP3s for high quality, which still are pretty large files, but they're still generally regarded as a lot smaller than that of a raw wave file. Now, Napster, of course, because there's illegal stuff going on, even though they themselves were not promoting people do the illegal stuff, they were kind of aware that people were sharing stuff back and forth. So they eventually be sued by the RCA, the record companies, and multiple different artists, such as Dr. Dre and Metallica. Those are probably some of the more famous ones. And obviously, it didn't do so well for Napster. Napster would eventually fold from the whole thing. They pretty much yanked everything out and said, you're shut down. Now, the whole idea from the record companies like, oh, we showed them, didn't really work because a lot of companies just popped up where that company left off. Other software services showed up, like Kazaa, LimeWire, FrostWire. There's a whole bunch of them. It wouldn't really, though, there wasn't really a solution until the launch of services like iTunes, where people could actually legitimately buy digital music. Because people weren't interested in necessarily buying a whole album. They maybe wanted one or two songs off that album. So it took a long time for the record company industry and other industries to realize that, hey, maybe we shouldn't try to go after the user, because that's what they were doing. They're going after the individuals that are doing this, and maybe we should instead target the sites hosting this. Took them a long time to figure that out, and now there's obviously better solutions out there. You have like streaming services, like Spotify, Pandora, that can do a lot of the stuff that get people what they want. Now, a couple other modern innovations just to talk about is you have other innovations. There's so many I could spend hours on, and there's constant new ones being made. We'll mention Craigslist here simply because what Craigslist did is it targeted, well, they didn't do it on purpose, but they replaced traditional classifieds in newspapers. Because part of this, one thing, even when things were up or down, newspapers could rely on classifieds for ads. Well, when Craigslist came out, obviously, hey, I can post my stuff for free. And so it kind of replaced that a little bit. Now, there's other innovations, as I mentioned, but one thing I do want to mention here, just to kind of close this out, is sites such as YouTube recently have come under criticism for the disregard for user-created content. because they keep changing a lot of the rules and stuff like that, or how their payments go up. And instead, they seem to be focusing on content produced by corporations. Like you have to upload content daily, for example, might be a thing. And well, if you're an individual, it might be hard for you to upload a quality piece of content every day. But you might be able to upload a quality piece of content every day if you're a corporation, because you might have teams of individuals that you can put up there. So it makes a big difference. And obviously privacy is another huge criticism that's kind of been brought out there. But I think that's enough for today. So we're going to just call it a wrap there. So hopefully it gives you a little bit to talk about and mull over with the history of the internet. And next time we shall dive into other topics such as browsers. So until then,